We're live. What's going on,
I
everyone?
always, I always feel like with you, I need like the intro music because you're so good at using music to set
Yeah, but
the
if you
set the tone
stream
and
intro
stage.
music, you gotta make sure it's royalty-free intro music,
This
or
is
else
where
you just
you
get
school.
smacked down. So we'll just have
This
to
is where
beep
you
off
school me.
ourselves.
Yeah, freestyle and just like Robbie Samuels. How are you, my
I'm
friend?
good, Tom. I'm
Where
good.
where does
What
where does
date,
today
year is
find
it?
you?
What
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 day,
day? What year is it?
year?
2023,
Oh my
something like
God!
that.
I feel like I just woke up from this dream. I had this dream that we couldn't have in-person events anymore. That was a nightmare. Oh my God! I'm
So
so glad that
awful,
wasn't
right?
real.
So you and I met in the deep dark depths of the last global pandemic thing. I mean, it must have been like 2021, 2022. I kept hearing like as I was meeting with people on Zoom, as you do when you
As you do.
can't, meet with people face to face, everyone your name kept coming up and like there's this guy. He has a Friday happy hour called No More Bad Zoom. I'm like, that sounds really cool. I'd like
Mhm.
kind of deep dived into like getting the mic, getting the camera, like making
Yeah.
this as normal as possible. And I'm like, oh man, someone else who wants to make this normal and comfortable and not weird. I want to meet this guy. Yeah.
So you're
So,
saying it wasn't a dream? Okay, good to
so it
know.
wasn't sorry. It wasn't a dream. It was actually that last
Uh,
2 years happened.
yeah. No, it
Yeah.
happened last 3 years. This week is really, the reality had set in 3 years ago. We were all trying to figure out what was going to happen next. And I hosted my first ever virtual happy hour on March 13th, 2020. And I had hosted other things on Zoom. So it wasn't like I came out of nowhere, but I hadn't done anything bigger than probably 20 people.
Mhm.
And I had never looked into the settings. I didn't know I had access to breakout rooms. But I was comfortable using Zoom one on one and in small groups, masterminds, group coaching, that kind of thing. But like everybody else, I was just turning it on and that was it. Like I didn't do anything beyond that.
Yeah, it was a whole new skill set for all of us, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I could count on one hand the number of times I'd used Zoom, Teams, Meet beforehand just because, you did it locally or you flew on a plane and went there and did it with them. So to have that open up and be like, okay, it sort of collectively forced us into figuring out this whole new dynamic of how do you create engaging events? How do you give someone presence at a distance and be there
Right.
with them? And we've talked a bit about it. You know the Zoom side inside and out. I kind of went the technical side, given my background of okay, what's the decent camera? Being on Zoom became like streaming. So we started borrowing a lot from Twitch and the streamers. They'd found the LED lights, the Stream Deck, the Camlink 4K years before, and it came into the realm. I know for me, as I was sitting down with individuals who grandparents who were too freaked out to read bedtime stories to their kids, but wanted to have that presence. C-suite executives who were interviewing for that next role on Zoom. It became really part of personal branding.
Mm,
The way you come through the camera, clear audio, clear sound. It became part of the way you're presented and the way you're received, and you could give more presence. Granted, in addition to being a human looking in the camera and actually engaging with the person on the other side wholeheartedly, but which you do honestly so well. I mean, that was the one thing that struck me popping around to a few different networking groups. The presence and inclusiveness. Like when I think of Robbie and I think of your personal brand, I think
mm.
Robbie is a very inclusive individual. You create spaces, and I've seen this throughout your first TED Talk all the way to this most recent book. Like the through line across all you do is you
Yeah.
want to create spaces where everyone is welcome. And you see that in the type of people who show up at your events. You have 90-year-old public speakers, you have,
Yeah.
people from all around the world. And I love that like gathering of shared humanity. Like it's really amazing, especially in a day and age where we are, ever more segmented and going into our different places. Like to have a place where, yeah, there's this weird, I don't know if I can even quite describe it. You bring together people who share and enjoy something. And I don't know, maybe you've, distilled what that is, but what,
Well, I
what,
think
what
I
is
would
that?
say heart-centered entrepreneurs are definitely a piece of that.
Mm,
People who are also abundant-minded, uh,
yeah.
not scarcity-minded. People who are willing to
Yeah.
share and support each other. I think that I try, and it's not around a particular type of skill that they do or the type of business they
Yeah.
have, or some of them don't even have businesses, but they just sort of like being around smart people who have smart conversations. And yeah, you were mentioning Dorothy, who's not yet 90. She's 89. Will be
Oh,
90 on
I made her older.
January
I'm gonna
2nd.
get a,
Yeah,
yeah.
her birthday is 1, 2, 3, 4, so it's really easy to remember. Anyone else
Man.
with a birthday? 1, 2, 3, 4. Anyway, so yeah, Dorothy, this launch, and I have to have proof that the book exists. Look, this is the
There
proof
you
that the
go.
book exists.
Yes, there's a book.
It's a real thing. But this launch has just been an incredible opportunity to really
Mm,
re-engage with my larger network and thank the sort of closer community who have been with me
mm,
the last 3 years. So both things have happened. The acknowledgments page in the back of the book, it's like got longer and longer as I kept thinking, oh, I don't want to leave anyone out. I don't want to leave anyone out.
yeah.
But the launch team, over 650 people now have joined a launch team. Um, the book's done really well. It's got over 107. Actually, I just saw 180 reviews came in today. Um,
Nice.
and it launched on Monday. So this has been only a couple weeks that the
Yeah.
book's been out there. The pre-launch, now it's out there almost a full week as part of the launch. So it's good. It's hit number one in 18 categories around the world as bestseller. So there's a difference thing, Tom, between writing a book and having people actually read your book. Because all the time
Mm,
I buy books from fellow authors because I want to support them. I might even like do a quick glance and like write a review for them, right? But
yeah.
it's not always the case that I read the book cover to cover and I'm like so jazzed. Like I recently got jazzed about a book that I listened to, and I'm like out telling everyone about it. And I think that's what you have to have happen. Like if people don't actually consume what you've created, then they can't be advocates of it. They can't evangelize what it. It's false. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
part of this has been getting lots of people from lots of walks of life, like you, to check out the actual content of the book. I'm curious, if you don't mind me asking you a question.
Yeah. Yeah.
What
Yeah.
was surprising to you in the book? Since you know a lot about Zoom, this is not like a new space for you. So, was there anything that
Yeah.
really stood out?
Your book, you did a very good, like, I'm amazed with the amount of information you packed in. Like, it is a very dense book. I mean, this one book, probably, if you were doing like a series, could have been three or four because the amount of information, very useful, pragmatic information that, you could flip it open, read a couple pages, and then take that away to whatever experience you're having on Zoom, whether you're an executive coach going one to one with someone, whether you're
Right.
planning a gathering that you want people to enjoy and feel included and actually have fun, and not be boring, honestly. So really, just frankly, it was the amount of good information included. I mean, I can't tell you the number. You always, whenever I pop into your, any of your meetings, it's always, I find a feature of Zoom that I didn't know about. I can't tell you the number of positive comments I've gotten on the pre-roll, just as simple as including that short pre-roll video for the green room while people are waiting. Maybe
Oh,
I'm
in the
running
waiting
late
room.
because
Yeah,
I'm,
yeah.
yeah, the waiting room video. You include that nice little intro that sets up. If it's someone I haven't chatted with, they're always like, "Oh man, how'd you do that?" I'm like, "Well, let me tell you." And it just becomes this really useful thing. So honestly, yeah, the density of information, both on the technical side, because your technical aptitude is exceptional. I mean, if you're not officially endorsed or like a paid promoter for Zoom, I feel like you could very easily like call them up and be like, "Hey,
Hey, Zoom, you're
I'm
listening?
helping people." Yes. um, but then the human centered element of it as well, getting the producer, having a producer, having, how do you do the soft, squishy human side of events as
Mm,
well? Because you can have your technicals dialed and still have a sterile, dull environment where people aren't connecting one to one. So I see it as you really do a nice job of both. And, how do
yeah.
you create the human side and the technical side and have those work together in beautiful synchrony, which is what really resonated with me. So I was thinking through like, okay, I don't want good audio just for good audio. I don't want good audio just for good video. I want to feel more like, we're just sitting across the table, chatting with each other, and less like you're all the way over there on that coast. I'm over here on this coast, because it opens up a lot more potential. It opens up
Mm,
new business opportunities, new connection opportunities. I mean, if you can work, as we found during the last few years, anywhere with a good, reliable broadband connection can be your office, which is such a freeing place. I mean, I was thinking yesterday
yeah.
about the weird old days where like you picked up your butt and took your butt to an office every day and then brought it home. And, there's value in that. There's value in human connection, and being there, staring eyeball to eyeball with someone. But we definitely to 2020 over indexed on, okay,
Yes.
you have to be there looking with someone. Otherwise, what are you doing?
Yeah. One of the hardships, and someone asked me this question at my launch party yesterday. It was one of the questions that
Yeah.
Gina Carey asked me in the interview was
Mm.
like, how do you write a book about something so technical knowing it's going to change? And I'll tell you, Tom, there are things that changed while I was writing the book. Because, of course, I kept checking back to double check things on Zoom.us. And there's one feature actually they mentioned during the time that I was writing the book that they were gonna
Mm.
give all of us 100 breakout rooms, but
Mm.
then they had a problem releasing it, and they said, "Oh, sorry, we're gonna have to delay that." So I had to make a decision, like,
Mm.
what do I do? So I ended up writing like, if it's 50, this is what you do. If it's 100, this is what you do. Because and of course, as of like a week ago, everyone has 100 rooms. So here's the thing I want to say about that: the book can be applied to any virtual platform.
Mhm.
So Teams, Google, whatever. I don't know, like whatever's out there, Blue Jean, all these ones that I haven't bothered trying because I'm so invested in learning Zoom. But a lot of it also applies to in person. I have so many friends who are professional speakers who've talked about how
Mm.
the purpose first design concepts and the facilitation techniques that I write about for virtual, a lot of it also applies to in person. And I am an event design consultant, so I do strategy for in person and
Yeah.
virtual. My experience is actually, I've got over a decade of experience with in person.
Yeah.
So nice that that's starting to come back a little bit with my clients. But I think if you read the book and you just take away those concepts around design and facilitation, and you apply that to any meeting you have, and actually even
Mm.
whether you should even have a meeting, because as I joked yesterday,
Yeah.
if you sit there and you think about what's the transformation we want to have, oh wait, this is just an email. I don't have to
Yeah.
have a meeting. Great, great.
Yeah.
We would all appreciate more people making that decision. So,
Yeah.
and then there's links in the back of the book which you can't click, even in an ebook. I didn't know that, like the way ebooks are designed, but I took them all and I put them on a PDF. So as part of the bonus content, that's one of the things that you'll get, and then you can just click through the links to easily get the most up to date information from Zoom because they're really good about keeping the same link and then just updating the content.
Yeah. Yeah. Now that's the other interesting place where you and I overlap is our love of design. Design meaning the holistic approach to design, which is okay,
Right.
start with the end in mind. What do you
Yes.
want to achieve? What type of vision do you have for whatever type of gathering? I really like, is it Priya Parker who wrote The Art of Gathering?
Yeah.
Such a good book where
Yeah.
it's like, have you ever stopped and paused and thought about, okay, why do we want to gather? Like, what is this for? Is it for fun? Is it for work? And then putting the systems in place to get to that
Yep.
outcome. I mean, obviously, if you have a monthly recurring staff meeting, it's going to be a different gathering than if your office has gone fully remote and you're doing your quarterly on-site in Cabo or Phoenix
Hmm.
or wherever. Yeah, I'm teaching at Oregon State University in a few weeks an introduction to design leadership class where it's taking people who wouldn't traditionally, engineers, accountants, business majors who haven't been exposed to design and saying, look through the lens of design thinking, because I'm a firm believer that it is such a transformative lens to
Yeah.
look through, because it really forces you to pause and think about every way something is experienced. Yeah, I mean, design is a deep, deep, deep rabbit hole, and there's so many different facets that
I
you can
was
go to.
I was on a plane ride reading a book. Community, The Structure of Belonging by Peter Block. I was by myself on the way to a conference. I got so excited. This is like 15 years ago. I got so excited about the concepts in the book, which were the concepts that I believed, and I was living and teaching and testing, but I didn't have language for it. I wasn't part of a community of people who had that language. So I was at the point where I was about to like elbow my seatmate who I didn't know. I'd be like, oh, look. So one of the concepts that I got from that book, which really stayed with me, was to not use the room the way it was left behind by the janitorial staff. That idea that when you like, I was the person who, as I was presenting at a conference in person, I would get into that room as quickly as I could, and I would arrange the chairs how I wanted them.
Yeah.
Like, or if part of the room was blocked by a pole or whatever, holding up the ceiling, I would make adjustments for where the stage was going to be. I would really focus on usability too, like not just accessibility. So these concepts, in a lot of ways, I've been thinking about this for a long time. This is like 20 plus years of me testing this all out. The challenge was how to do it in the virtual landscape when pre 2020, virtual was just sort of like bonus content. We didn't expect a lot from it. It really was just sort of like a webinar. 45 minutes of death by PowerPoint followed by ineffectual Q&A, no one moderating chat. And we just were like, that's what it is. But now, when we sort of set, well, particularly back in 2020 and 2021, like we couldn't go in person. The idea that events are about content and connection, which is why we get on planes. I was like, how do we do that? Like, I was stumped 3 years ago. Like, how do we actually do this? Because just like everybody else, I was like, this is lousy. Like, we don't know how to do that. So, but I had that intention of figuring it out. I'm getting better every time I tried. And 8 months after the pandemic sort of shut everything down in my business, I had a new thriving 6-figure business based on all new revenue streams. And, this community, the No More Bad Zoom virtual happy hour, I never charged them, but they're the ones who gave me a sandbox to play. So when clients started hiring me, I had a lot of confidence about my skill and my ability to really bring their events online with less stress and greater participant engagement.
Yeah. No, it's good to have those meetings of the minds where it's a way to bring potentials in, prospects. I know I get so much benefit from just chatting with people who are outside of my lane, seeing different things in different industries, interacting with spaces that maybe I would otherwise be completely ignorant to.
Right.
Yeah. What year was the TED Talk, the original? Because that was sort of where this whole, the first thing you hear about Robbie Samuels, you hear bagels versus croissants. And you're like,
yeah,
bagels
I'm the
versus croissants.
croissant guy.
What the?
So
Yeah.
what happened was I left my day job because it got in the way of my business, as my mentor Dory Clark pointed out. That's when it's time to go. And I had sort of been speaking on the side for 5 years. So now it's 2015, and I realized I want to build a different audience. The audience I had was nonprofits. So over the next, from 2015 to 2019, I launched a podcast. That's the Fancy Mic, which I'm still hosting. I published my first book, Croissants versus Bagels, Strategic, Effective, and Inclusive Networking at Conferences. Now, croissants versus bagels was the most sticky concept of the talk that I'd done for over a decade, or at that point, probably like 8 years. The idea is that when you walk into a room at a networking event and everyone's sort of standing there clustered together in those shoulder-to-shoulder huddles, it was impossible to break into
Should
groups.
I do the clip from the TED Talk, and that way we can see it? And
If
then
you want,
can,
yeah.
Why
Yeah,
not?
sure.
Yeah, I'll
Why
fire it
not?
up here. I clipped it.
You
So
have it
yeah, this
queued up?
is.
Way to go.
I
What a
do.
producer
Let's
you are.
do it. Self-produced, man. I learned from the best. All right, here we go. This is the clip.
Looks like in a crowded room. I'm going to invite 5 friends to join me on stage. They're going to form a circle and talk about bagels because everyone's got an opinion about bagels. That's what it's like, right? Everyone's so engrossed in their conversation, they're not noticing that I'm hovering on the edges. No one's giving me an opportunity to come in. There's no easy way to join them. But what if one person opens up their body language and makes space for others to join? Do you see it? Do you see it? Instead of a bagel, We now have a croissant. Even one-on-one. This can make a real difference in your approachability. So this is a more closed, more intimate conversation that you would.
So good. I mean, that
Oh
just
my
says it all.
God, what a flashback. So okay, so the book comes out, group coaching program. I write for HBR about networking at events or networking generally, and then at TEDx gets recorded November 2019. It's released in 2019, January of 2020. I am poised to be an overnight success, 10 years in the making, working on a new talk, hire a new virtual assistant who I'm actually working with 3 years later to help do research. And then, yeah, March, 2 months later, Nick, no one needs any of the skills or expertise that I'd acquired over the previous decade plus, and I had to find a new way to show up and offer value. So March 9th, I accepted that this was happening. March 11th, I was in a meeting with my peer mastermind and saying, like, what do we do? And someone in that group said, Robbie, you don't think of networking as something that only happens at events. You've built a global network over the last 5 years. Go teach people how to do that. And I was like, all right, get out of my own way. The next day, I wrote and shared 9 ways to network in a pandemic. It was an email I was going to send the following week, but I shared it as a blog post. It was very well received because it was very timely. And one of those ways, number 3, was to host a virtual happy hour. So that night, 8 p.m. Eastern, I posted a note in the Facebook group that I'm a part of, Dory Clark's community, actually. And I said, would anyone come if I hosted a virtual happy hour tomorrow? And I got a few yeses. I was like, that's it. I'm doing it. 5 o'clock Friday seemed like the next likely time to do it. There was no research about what was the best day. I didn't know I was going to keep doing it. 3 years later, I'm still hosting events every Friday at 5 o'clock Eastern. But that's how it started. Like I had never done a purely social event virtually. And then the following week, the 20th of March, I had during that week looked under the hood and investigated and discovered I had access to breakout rooms. So I opened breakout rooms the first time on March 20th, 2020. The people started reaching out to me, Tom. Like everyone suddenly, I was like the Zoom expert in their social circle. Like I was that much smarter than everyone else. And I'm a business strategy coach. That's one of my other hats. And at the time, I was coaching a dozen entrepreneurs a week on behalf of a company. And then in April, took on overseeing 120 students through an online course about how to launch an online course. So I was meeting a ton of entrepreneurs in the moment of their panic. And I said, I can't just fill my calendar with social calls with all these people who want to pick my brain. Like, I mean, my extrovert self was like thrilled to see other human beings that I wasn't in charge of feeding, but I knew there had to be more than that. So I turned those calls, those inbound inquiries, into research calls. And my second book is kind of the story of that. Like I share the story, but I also share the elements of it. I actually started working on that book in 2018 and put it aside and picked it up again in 2021 to write it. So yeah, I listened really deeply, and I don't talk about all things that didn't work. I just tried a lot of things in 2020. 2020 was a very busy time because I had this other job now where I was doing all this work for this company, which was it turned out to be a more than full-time role, way more. And then my own business, which had been defunct, suddenly started taking off. So those were those early times. It's just trial and error. I don't know if we'll ever get back to that moment of freedom. Nobody was looking at you or me.
Yeah.
Like you could do anything. You could try things. You could fail at things. You could completely belly flop at things. Nobody was caring because we were all so focused on our own life. It was very freeing as an entrepreneur. And I fully embraced that freedom and just went for it. And by the end of the year, I had a few revenue streams that were working for me.
Yeah, no, it's so good. I mean, you could definitely look at that 2020 to 2022 window, and it would have been just as easy to shake your fist and say, "Okay, when I can get back face to face, we'll
Yeah.
launch this." But it was such a time of rebirth, a reset. I know for me, I deep dived around 2020 into Lunch Club, the one-to-one AI-enabled networking application. I just checked yesterday. I think I'm coming up on 400. I mean, I did about 450
Wow. I
meetings.
did like 6.
Yeah, I don't know. There was just something, and it was mostly because of the pandemic, where I was like, I just continually met people. I'm like, I
That's
never would have
awesome.
otherwise met with this person. And they're like
Yeah.
fascinating. Like I met people from, I've met a founding member of the Stanford D School. I met people from MIT's Media Lab.
Wow.
I met someone who introduced me to ERA NYC, which is New York City's largest tech incubator that I now mentor at and talk to founders about building, sustainable brand. So yeah, to your point, sort of that hard reset of, okay, everything we did pre 2020 isn't working. Let's reboot. And yes, it was a really horrible, challenging time, not to sugarcoat it, because we lost a lot of really good friends, family during that
Yeah.
stretch. But it really was this wild transformation foisted upon really the entire world. It was like,
I mean, that's
okay,
that privilege of not having been like in that in 2020, I did not lose anyone super close to me in that very beginning. I later did, but
yeah,
I think that if that had sort of if that emotional like kick to the gut had happened, like I was freaked out and wiping down every grocery that was delivered to my door. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like I was doing all that stuff, but um we had a home. We weren't sharing it with anybody. We could close our doors and take
yeah,
care of our own selves, and our kids were not in school, and they were so young also. They were 2 and 4 when the pandemic began. So they didn't like lose touch with friends, or they didn't have any
yeah,
established routines that were disrupted in a way that mattered to them. And we just it sort of there was a perfect storm of possibility that happened. My wife already worked mostly remote. She used to go in a few times a week to a role, but then they shifted entirely online. But she already had a home office because she was
yeah,
working at home 90% of the time. I had a home office. So I think for a lot of people, it was incredibly disruptive, as well as like, worried about our health and our life and our life and health of our family and friends. But
yeah,
for us, like the daily disruption didn't happen as much because we were just like had to sort of figure out what to do, what do you do with your kids all day.
yeah,
And then they were also being taught on Zoom. Oh my gosh, early on, Tom, the preschool teacher, because my 4-year-old was in preschool, they went to
yeah.
Zoom. My youngest, at first, we just like didn't even try. And then my youngest started sitting in on the classes, and I was writing notes to the teacher and trying to give her tips on how to do spotlighting correctly and mute people and all that. So she got good pretty
Love that.
quick because I kept coaching her. So we found out later that well, maybe we had just found out that my 4-year-old's autistic. He had just gotten an IEP. So he had been in a mixed classroom where half the kids would sort of model the behavior
Yeah.
and half, were needing that modeling. Well, suddenly he was in a small group setting where there was no one modeling. Oh, you know who's modeling? The kid who's 2 years younger. So the
Yeah.
younger sibling would show up and like raise hand and answer questions and be all cheerful. And it was so cute but didn't, just to think that they didn't even know what school was. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
conceptually, what is school? What I laughed was they had a lot of understanding about how to like talk about the weather and do like how to do roll call, but they didn't know how to line up. They didn't learn that until years later when they went to
Yeah.
camp and school. They didn't know how to line
Yeah.
up and
You're
go
like, oh,
somewhere.
this is what it's like to go to school with other kids in an
Yeah.
actual school building. Yeah. No, I totally get it. Ours were a little bit older. So we had a first grader when the pandemic lockdown hit, and he did virtual schooling, which was really survival schooling, honestly. He still really, really, really loves his iPad. So
Uh,
we're definitely like, okay, sort of like, and there's follow-ons from that. Our youngest, his daycare was able to stay open. They did all the protocols. They were a really small cohort. He probably had the most normal pandemic experience. He had his like regular group of 10 other kids that he went with and hung out at the small daycare. But yeah, that's such a wild, I mean, I wonder when we look back 30 years, we look at our grandparents and great grandparents who went through the depression, and they will forever like hoard string and twine and like really cherish resources. I wonder what our kids, in looking back 50 years from now, like
they're gonna
what they
overbuy toilet
follow.
paper.
Seriously, they'll be like, I will
Maybe they'll
never be
stop
left
throwing it at
without
people's
toilet paper.
houses and eggs. Do you realize the few things that kids used to throw in our day, we throw eggs and toilet paper at people's houses on Halloween. Could you
Like,
imagine?
what? Those are precious
Those are
commodities.
so
You can't throw
precious.
those. Oh
Sorry, that
my
was a meme I
gosh.
saw. It cracked me up. I can't take credit for that
That's
one. That was pretty funny.
There is a big old kernel of truth in that one, my friend. Oh man. Okay. So the book. So if you could so I know some people who might be watching and are looking at hosting. So they're going to be hosting a virtual conference targeted toward Latin America in the coming months. They have 55,000 attendees booked in looking forward to virtual events. So the past is the past, but this is 2023. Wow, awesome. We're still doing a lot of this virtual stuff. What is the most important Jenga block from your book? Because it goes into so much. But if someone was like, okay, Robbie, give me the one or two things that if I nail these for my virtual event, or maybe even overlap between one-on-one, if I'm a coach and I want to do good Zoom, what are those just power tips that you would say, hey, nail this, and a lot of other things will fall into place?
So I want to say that the book is really geared scope-wise to people who are presenting a 60, 75, 90-minute program virtually one time, meaning a one-off presentation at like a conference or a training or a workshop. Now, you can absolutely use these concepts for much larger multi-day events because they're made up of these smaller blocks of time.
Yeah.
And you also can use it to apply to a team meeting or a class that meets regularly, like weekly. The difference is that I'm a big fan. The low tech part of this is that I don't use third party tools. I do things within Zoom. So the book mentions that you can, there are things like Mentimeter and Jamboard, et cetera, but you will lose people if you're not sure of their tech capability and you launch something and you're like, oh, it's easy. I'll just put a link in chat. People have been trained to not click the link in chat because they lose their Zoom window. So
Yeah.
they don't know how to get it back and they don't know how to get that to stop happening. So they just don't do it. So if you want participation, built in Zoom, like a poll, for instance, or even the advanced poll where people can type their answers in, you're going to get a 50, 70, 90% participation rate. When you go to Mentimeter, it's probably like 60, 40% participation rate. Like it skews lower. And so it's do you want to look fancy or do you want to actually connect with people? If you
Yeah.
really know your audience and you can teach them how to use whiteboard or annotating or something like that, and you're going to use it all the time, then absolutely go for it. Like I think that's where those tools really shine is when you're going to meet with people regularly. Um, for a big event like that, because I think mostly I'm geared towards working with companies that are like under, under 600 people per session. There could be like 3,000 people at the event, but they'll have 5 or 6 concurrent sessions. Sometimes we do that. Um, how your speakers look is actually really, really key. And so the very like the beginning of the book is all about getting set up for success. And it's such a key thing because if you were told right now, Tom, okay, Tom, we're going to interview you on MSNBC tomorrow. You're going to be on a panel of experts. It's going to be you and these 2 other really famous people. Would you change anything about your setup? And if anyone watching is like, oh, I would, go do it now. Don't wait for the call from mainstream media. So, all the people who, and by the way, how many pictures are there of Zoom online where the person's looking down at their laptop smiling?
Nobody looks good with an up the nose
Nobody looks
shot,
good in that
man. You
angle.
may
Even
you
my
may
little
have
kids.
styled that nose hair as attractively as possible, but ain't no one
But
wants to see
yet
up your
it's
nose.
reinforced with these images, these stock images you can get, which everyone's reusing. So camera being eye level, not
Yeah.
having your ceiling show, 2 fingers above your head. I have people do this during my setup, and I'm like, it's like an oath we're gonna take together. Looking at the camera, sitting in the middle, like proper framing. And then, the stuff that you talk about, like, it's lights, camera, you. So make sure all your
Yeah.
lights coming from in front of you. I have a big wall of windows right here that I have to manage.
Yep.
Having as good audio as you can get because people will, if your video is a little glitchy, their brain will like fill that in. But if your audio is glitching, they're gonna want to turn it off. And the study that I found was that if they do stick around, they actually think you're less plausible uh, because of your bad audio. They
Yeah.
actually don't believe you as much because you're bad audio, or they just
Yeah.
leave. So and this is an expensive mic. I mean, I've only sold a couple of people into buying this mic, and it was very particular situations. But there's a range of options. That's your specialty. Yeah, I mean, I just think the framing is interesting because you aim to get your shoulders like as even across as possible. Because if you're on MSNBC, you don't know how tall people are in real life, but somehow their shoulders are all equal height. Like, how do they do that? And for them, they're just using the chair height. Like, so
Yep.
I think those are the things. I watched the replay of my launch party for last night, and I was realizing that part of why, I mean, there was someone who was new to my community who was writing up and down in chat. It was really funny. I just learned about this. Oh my God, this is amazing. I have to go, but I'm going to come back. And I was like, what was it? Because, it's just another virtual program. Every speaker knew how to interact with the camera. Every speaker knew how to hold space. Everyone, like, it moved. Like, everyone had things to say. When we moved, we had lots of different things happening.
Yeah.
We didn't just like do a slideshow for the whole time.
Yep.
We had breakout rooms. We had interactive like exercises. So these are all basics to me now. So I don't really fully appreciate them. But if you can't nail these basics, the expectations of your participants are going to get higher and higher. And if it's a 55,000 person or anything like that, right, you've got to have an incredible third-party platform that lets you have profiles and set up, one-on-one, meetings, or the ability to like open up your own chat rooms so people can kind of come hang out. I mean, there are some, I'm not familiar with them, but there's some incredible platforms out there. The folks I'm working with either use a simple platform. I make a landing page for them sometimes as a simple way of navigating. We really you can do so much just in Zoom. And now, of course, Zoom has Zoom events and this whole like hub. So if you've got a multi-day conference, you could actually use their platform to do that. But even with just basic, pro Zoom is a lot. A lot you can do
Yeah.
for a couple of bucks a month.
Your point about eliminating third-party plugins, I mean, that in itself is a design principle, I mean,
Yeah.
all about, you look at any user experience UX design, it's all about reducing friction. So if there's two paths, give your users this flatter, smoother road, and they'll do it. But if you're adding more barriers, whether that's two-factor authentication or add-ons or figuring out other elements, you're just going to frustrate. And any time is going to be potentially, there maybe people are so frustrated they tune out or log off or don't follow you into the next whatever. No, you and I were similar. We had similar pandemic experiences in that I did something weird during the lockdown. I joined Toastmasters, which my dad was in, my granddad was in. It was a really, it's got deep roots. I was a public speaking major in college, so I was comfortable in front of a room. But on Zoom, like we went fully remote, so I never like physically was in the same room as these people. So speaking to a camera when you don't have the feedback from the audience, or presenting, or being more aware of your eye lines and how you're giving presence. Is it weird if I'm constantly giving you the eye contact? When do you break eye contact? Oh, this is fun. I can cheat. I can position my notes right beneath the camera lens, so it looks like I'm looking ahead, but I can kind of cheat a little bit. All those fun factors I loved. You came up with something recently in the last, it was one of your last meetings where you're like, put googly eyes up above your camera.
I have them now
to remind you. Dude, I love that, because this is your window to everyone who's following along.
Yeah. I have to give a
and
shout out to Elizabeth Steele. She's the one I got the idea from.
There you go. There you go. And, and for me, being in Toastmasters and having some of these people who were expert public speakers, I mean, had been speaking for 30, 40 years. But on Zoom, it was like hitting the reset button. It's like, you can't speak on Zoom. You can't present on Zoom like you would in front, like you're working in a room. It's a whole different skill set in helping navigate that. And that was part of why, I spun up Zoom Pro Tips, looking at, okay, there are 4 factors that determine your presence on Zoom. Obviously the camera, the mic, for audio, your platform that you're using, if you have an old, the horsepower matters, which,
Mhm.
my time working with tech leaders, like Intel, I'm well acquainted with, PC refresh cycles and all that fun stuff that keeps your technology sharp. And then broadband connection, as better internet connections roll out,
Right.
from, cable DSL on up to fiber, that is a key deciding factor as well. So all that to say, yeah, getting your technicals dialed will pay dividends in helping, however you want to appear. Obviously, we want to each appear our best, but if you're a public speaker charging a high rate, you're really going to want to deliver on what you've charged.
Yeah, I mean, early in the pandemic, there were folks that really tried to recreate that in-person experience with really tricked out home studios with green screens and three camera angles and a hair light. That's a real thing. And just like the
Right.
ability to remotely toggle different things, and
Mm-hmm.
which is awesome if you did that. But the people I'm speaking to didn't do it. I'm actually more
Yep.
speaking to professional speakers and trainers who bought a bunch of tech in 2020 in a panic and probably still have a bunch of it in boxes. Like those are my
Yeah.
people, because like I held
Yeah.
off buying a tiny Stream Deck until December of 2021, and I've still never plugged it in. I bought it to use for an event in January of 2022, and then realized it was not necessary for the purpose that I was trying to create, and that it was about me, not about my audience. That I was trying to do something to make myself look sharp. But if my content was what they needed, my delivery was more important than how flashy it looked. And that it was a distraction to me, and it may impact my ability to deliver quality presentation. So I never plugged it in. And it's only 6 buttons. And of course, there are people who bought the Gigundo versions of these things.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I read an article early on by Fast Company. It's the global events director of Microsoft. He wrote about, and I wrote about this in the book. I quoted him. Uh, In-person events are theatrical. They're big. They're all senses, and virtual events are cinematic. And we're like in this little box, and so
Yeah.
we can't do we there's just things we can't do. Our physicality is limited, our senses are limited, how we hold space just changes. We're actually
Yep.
competing with television, not with an in-person event. And by
Yep.
the way, it's all live. I just gotta say this for the record. And even just yesterday, someone was like, When I do live events, I'm like, what are we doing right now? Like, this is a live, like, we're live, folks. When you're on a Zoom call with other people, that is a live event. There is a virtual event and there's an in-person event, but they're both live. Unless you're so boring virtually that everyone wants to die. That's a different problem. But I love this concept of theatrical versus cinematic. And then from that, to really think about creating like episodic or modular or segmented. There's different ways of wording it, but the idea of having chunks. So, and that's part of what my launch party was, right? It was like different sort of things that were happening, different segments that were woven through, and each one served a purpose to help us achieve a particular objective. So, I think that's the design piece that they're trying to replicate what they did in person instead of reimagining it using all these digital tools and sometimes analog tools. Truthfully, paper
Yeah.
and pen, folks, like get people to use paper and pen on a virtual call, and it's like mind blowing.
Yeah. Yeah, there was that really interesting. I like that distinction between, live, if you're producing live theater versus making something for Netflix. It makes me think of, I don't know if you watched the Hamilton Netflix special where they adapted the screen, or the theater experience to the screen. And obviously,
Yes.
by nature, it will lose something because theater is theater for a reason. It's
Yeah.
curated, it takes a moment in time, it's
Right.
humans, they're right there. But yeah, and they did a little bit. I feel like there was a director's commentary version where they talked a little bit about how they rigged the cameras and how they adjusted a few things to take some of that flavor. Obviously, they couldn't bring it all over. But
Right.
yeah, no, I hadn't looked at it that way, but that's a really interesting point.
I was lucky to sort of come across some of that early on. I also, in I think like April, I heard about conveners.org, which is unfortunately since closed, but they hosted a, a virtual conveners course. And so I attended that. I actually met my connection at Feeding America, and they became my biggest client. And I've been working them ever since, and like love
Yeah.
supporting what they do. And it's interesting because March 9th, when I accepted that this was happening, my first way of sort of cementing that that was true was I made a $10 a month gift to my local food bank
Hmm.
because I knew that the worst thing that was going to happen to me was for me to fall into a scarcity mindset.
Hmm.
And so while like we were all sort of like, I was like, there are others who are going to be worse off than us. Food banks are
Yeah.
going to have a run for their money. So many families are going to face food insecurity. I can part with this $10 every month. And when I can, I'll give more. And
Hmm.
so, yeah, now through my monthly content and connection club, half the proceeds go to Feeding America. And turns
Hmm.
out I'm now a major donor. So so there you go. Like you put these things into existence, right?
Yeah.
But I feel really fortunate to have experienced the conveners framework. They really helped me conceptualize purpose first design in a really concrete way. The to and
Hmm.
from in the book is something that I had intuited, but they gave words to this idea that
Hmm.
people come in to your program or your session thinking, feeling, and are doing one thing. At the end, they're
Hmm.
thinking, feeling, and are doing another thing. And that time, the in between is that transformation. And so you have to
Hmm.
create objectives to get people to have those transformations. And if something doesn't serve that purpose, then you don't do it. Like, don't do a breakout room just because you can. Don't play music
Yeah.
just because you can. Don't use Mentimeter just because you can. Like, everything needs to serve a purpose. And if you really design to that end, I feel like that when you said like, what's the thing you can really do? Get that dialed in. There's three sort
Hmm.
of things I think are necessary to avoid Zoom fatigue or whatever platform you're using fatigue. Poor Zoom. Like get picked on is a four-letter word. But oh wait, they are. Um, so you have to have the
Won't tell them that.
content dialed in. That I think is so key. So really understanding
Yeah.
what your people need. And that's I think where purpose first design will help you understand that. You have to have some kind of engagement, either a really interactive chat, a platform if it's huge, like thousands of people, a platform where
Hmm.
people can interact even outside those groups. So you have a whole
Yep.
conference experience. The Q&A has to be well moderated and well facilitated and people interacting. And then I just think after that, it's just delivery. Like if you're,
Hmm.
I mentioned this the other day, but I had a facilitator who wouldn't take direction from me about how to
Hmm.
set up herself. And it was a very tense conversation. And the women in the room were sharing really personal things. And this is how she was sitting. Oh, yeah. And we were staring at her forehead the whole time.
Hmm.
She wasn't holding space. She might have
Yeah.
thought she was, but no, we were not. She was not facilitating in that way, and
Hmm.
no one knew who was going next. She kept losing track of who had gone, and that's the
Hmm.
stuff that gets in the way. Like you could have a great program plan and great content, but that delivery piece is where you know.
Yeah.
Um, and then of course the tech. Like you've got to have good audio. Period.
Yeah.
The best
Yeah.
best you can get. And I don't know if it happens to you, but I often get on with speakers because I always do a tech check, and I can visibly see the fancy mic somewhere in the corner of their screen, but I can tell they're using their computer audio, and I'm like,
You're like,
could you
you
double could
gotta.
you double check that? And they're like,
Yeah.
oh, you're right.
Yeah. No, you nailed it, and I think I was listening to well, you see the rise of podcasts and the power of audio. I mean, even more than video.
Yeah.
I was listening to this really interesting unpacking like podcasting. Before that, it was radio.
Yeah.
There's something really interesting about having someone right in your ear and having like really clear, crisp,
Well, particularly with
quality
really, I
audio.
mean, like you and I with our little pop, right? Like this is how I'm listening to things, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
it's not just I mean, they're in your ear. Like the
yeah,
quality is noticeable. Yeah.
yeah.
That's why
And if
early
you're
on
trying,
I went with this mic, even though,
yeah,
I didn't know what the plan was in the future.
Well, and to your point, if you're trying to have a very direct, intimate conversation where, yeah, maybe you're a coach and you're helping a client through some rough stuff, or you're really trying to help something land, anything that helps you get to that, and any tech that serves ultimate purpose. I had this realization as I was lunch clubbing during lockdown. I think when they started, it was literally a one-to-one. Like, you would go physically. I think they launched in San Francisco or the Bay. You'd go meet with someone. I was like, man, I can give someone just as much presence. I could go grab lunch with someone and just be on my phone, distracted, zero presence. Or, be on Zoom, put that away, and have, like, we can create presence here. We can create space, create, intentional human one-to-one connection, at a distance. I was like, wow, that's really cool. I want to have the tech to make that possible. No,
I
cool.
feel like the book, in a lot of ways, and of course, I always want to attract more event clients. I love working with mission-driven organizations to help them, bring their events to life with less stress and greater participant engagement. But I also thrilled that a whole bunch of people are going to use this to do it yourself, DIY, improving the
Yeah.
way they show up, because collectively we need to raise the bar of what's possible. We want to turn Zoom in Zoom fatigue to Zoom intrigue, so that people are like, wait, I can do what?
Like that. Yeah.
So get them thinking about the possibilities, get them working to get 5% better, because big
Yeah.
companies aren't going to hire me to help them with their virtual programming if they have dismissed virtual programming as a possibility.
Yeah.
I have clients that have committed to virtual. Like, it's not just a possibility, it is the optimal choice for their constituency. Like, I have
Yep.
one client in California, like, they used to do 2 events in California, and now they do 1 virtual, and they have speakers from all over the world. They actually booked my friend from Australia presented for California. That friend would not have done it
Yeah.
if it was traveling to California. Not what have happened.
Yeah.
And another client, actually also in California, used to do tons of events, and now they're able to do it collectively, and their members don't have to spend money on travel. So they get more
So good.
participation, they get more information out. The replays are easier to get. Like, you can't record every session in person. Like, no one
Yeah.
has the budget for that. But they now get the replays out quickly. They have more content all out, so people have more CEU credits being offered, not just
Yeah.
at the event, but in the months sort of after. So there are so many. I mean, think of all the chapters of associations where there's one chapter for an entire state.
Yeah.
Like, if you can mix up in-person and virtual programming, you're going to actually retain more members on a local level, which means there'll be more members willing to travel to the annual conference that's in person. So
Yep.
I think we need more language, because that's not hybrid in a traditional sense of simultaneous events, which I'm not a big fan of. But we need a word for how to design an experience that includes some virtual programming, a big in person, maybe some virtual
Yep.
programming, but it's creating community over a period of time. It's going to build stronger connections, retain your members. It's such a small investment compared to the effort to recruit. And I think this is the magic, is that we're now all comfortable. My dad actually was like, "You wrote a book about Zoom, but everyone's like work, and we all know how to get on Zoom." And I get it.
Wasn't
Like, he's
that
like,
like over? Didn't that end
yeah,
in
he's like, I know
2022?
how to
Getting
get
on
on
Zoom?
Zoom. But getting on Zoom, that's just the beginning, right? Like, design and
Yeah.
facilitation and all these tech
Yep.
principles. Yeah. So I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of potential going forward. We're not done yet.
Yeah, yeah, no, we all know the basics. Let's all get better. Let's do this better. And I feel like, getting back to, yeah, corporate events, having that, if it's usually on Zoom or at a distance, when you do gather in person, it's that much more special. It's like, wow, we're going to get together and actually I'll be able to shake your hand. That's really cool. And if you're saving, the resources, and you make that live event, like, it's amazing. You all gather and mix. Maybe it's 3 days, you work hard, you play hard, you get to foster those connections with your coworkers. That seems really interesting and sustainable, and a really nice way to, foster that connection at a distance.
So I got to tell you, it's my first book, which you've mentioned earlier.
Yep.
It's about networking at conferences. And if I thought back in 2017, people needed support, because we always have high intention around networking, but we have very low follow through. right? We have great intentions when we're getting on the plane, but the reality is we don't come home with the right connections.
Yeah.
We are so out of practice. So this is where I'm not just a virtual event design consultant. I'm an event design consultant. I have some clients that are only doing in person or doing a mix, some of them. And I meet with each session. I help them design their session and I train them on some micro adjustments for before and after their program in the concurrent breakout rooms to help people connect and meet each other, because that's what people need. And I also have some kind of things that they do throughout the event. There's one, you're one of my 5. So, you know, if you hear someone say or ask something that catches your attention, write their name down. That's somebody you're going to want to meet during the breaks, during lunch, during the reception. If you don't have 5 names written down by the end, you're not paying attention. And then you can go up to any of these people in the hallway and say, hey, Tom, you're one of my 5. That thing you said earlier today. And it is like the perfect opening line. And you could say it to any level. Doesn't matter if you're new, they're new, you're the CEO, whatever it is. And so we've used that at a number of in-person conferences, and you hear it sort of happening in the hallway. And we also train people to not bagel, to be the croissant. And like I hear people repeat these phrases, very sticky concepts. So I think there is some thought we have to do to create dynamic, welcoming, intentional in-person events. We can't just throw people together. We have to step it up. And I actually declared that in 2018. So I was like, the organizations that figure out how to have those kinds of experiences will retain members, particularly the next generation that has always been more digitally advanced. They didn't need the in-person the way the older generations did, but now we all really have to value going in person. For me to leave my driveway, and I'm a huge extrovert, I love people, but for me to leave my driveway, I'm going to Costco. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like it's a lot for me to be like, all right, do I want to go? Are those gonna be the right people? Is it gonna, you know what I mean? Like, is it gonna be a good experience? It's a lot less work for me to get on a Zoom call, you know?
Yeah.
Sorry, I had to jump in and say that.
No, you got it, man. And that's honestly, that's a really good place to leave it, because that's such
Sure,
a good capstone. So yeah, the book, Break Out of Boredom, available
Break Out of
now.
Boredom. You get all kinds of tons. I want to mention one of the free resources that are in the book, because I was at a group of speakers yesterday and they were blown away. I mention in the book, but I don't share the details. In the bonus, you'll find out you can do virtual overlays using Zoom without OBS and without Ecamm.
Okay.
Excuse me. You can use it's actually the video filters. You can upload a custom video filter. They do not make it intuitive or easy. It's not as simple as hitting plus and adding an image the way you would for like a virtual background. And I don't know why, but it's a really cool feature. And when I'm on Zoom and I can just like put my book up on the side there, it's just sweet. And I don't have the fancy Stream Deck hooked up. I looked into Ecamm, I played around with it, and I was like, it's just not really what I need. And the people I'm serving, like the clients that I have, their speakers aren't going to know how to do that. So what's the point of me knowing how to do it? Like if I show up all fancy and then I'm telling them not to use it, like they're going to be like, what? Why? I want to look as fancy as you. So, but throw one image up. That's in the bonus content at breakoutofboredom.com.
Love it. Love it. And then No More Bad Zoom, the monthly happy hour, a great place to like get just a free, no obligation, get in, get your
taste. There's always music at the beginning.
There's music at the beginning. You can see you dance. You can meet Dorothy, who is super rad.
Wilhelm, shout out.
Oh my gosh. Shout out to Dorothy.
89 years old. She got certified as a virtual professional at 86 years old in 2020. And her life, she shared yesterday, her life is transformed because of it.
Man, I want to be Dorothy when I grow up. I want to be like that level of just like
engaged, learning.
OG engaged. Oh man.
Yeah. I know.
Robbie, so good, man. Thanks for taking the time. Congrats on the book success thus far. I know it's just going to continue.
I can't wait.
I've learned so much. I've learned so much in following along with your book launch, because I've launched not my own book, but someone else's book before. So I'm taking notes for the next time, because I know there will be another book in the future.
Well,
so
all of the launches details are being shared in a book launch strategies masterclass that is private to any launch team member. So if folks want to know more, they should reach out to you, and you can help get them the book launch team link. You commit to writing an Amazon review. You'll get invited and get all these extra bonuses. And I appreciate it. I'm happy to share what I've done. Yeah. Thanks,
I'll put all
everybody.
the notes. All right. Cheers, brother. And yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in.